As I said, the latest news poll in the Australian shows support for Labor has rebounded, still maintaining its lead two-party preferred over the coalition. That's the news poll. But in a different poll in the Financial Review, the freshwater strategy poll, it's a bit of a different story. Labor's lost its lead for the first time since the election. The Prime Minister's personal ratings also continue to slide. Now, clearly, it has been a shocking second half of the year for the PM. The video referendum was a debacle he's struggling to recover from. He divided the country, with 60% of Australians voting no. He denies it, but he's not been strong in his support of Israel, and no senior minister of his government has even been there. Electricity prices are a broken promise, but it's the cost of living that's killing Anthony Albanese politically. Costing a fortune nowadays to fill up your car with petrol. Mortgage stress is real, given the interest rate rises. So let's bring in the foreign editor at the Australian newspaper, Greg Sheridan. Greg, always great to see you. What do you make of how Anthony Albanese is doing mid-term? He's 18 months into a 3-year term.
Well, I think Albanese is a terrifically good bloke, and most people recognise that. I mean, he's a good-hearted individual and he wants the best for Australia. But his government has run badly off the rails, and they need to take this Christmas period to reset and gather themselves again. They've lost all sense of direction on strategic issues. We just give junk and phony rubbish to Ukraine. He's had no discipline on Israel at all, absolutely no discipline. And now we're even humming and hawing about sending one lousy ship to help the Americans in the Red Sea, whereas the whole basis of AUKUS is that they'll send their ships to help us. The energy stuff, everything you said is absolutely true. And just to add another piquant note to that, China makes all this stuff cheap because they use coal-generated electricity. They have such a big price advantage because they get cheap electricity, which they make with the coal that we export to them. And then we re-import all this stuff and pay a massive premium on it. I think the government looks as though it doesn't care about the ordinary concerns of regular folks. It was massively derailed by the voice referendum, and it looked as though it was obsessed with sort of bespoke, issues that count for the elites but don't count for ordinary folks. And in the end, it's going to come down to the economy and security as ever. And it's tracking, having started out really well, it's tracking poorly on both those fronts.
Greg, this might be a bit harsh, but is he perhaps a bit weak on foreign affairs? That's your area of expertise.
Yes, I think he started out well, but his government has just become completely confused. And again, I think the voice referendum has a large amount to do with it because it's lost all sense of its own strategic judgment. I think they've fundamentally misjudged China. So whether it's DFAT or the Labor Party itself, they've decided they don't need to make any military preparations because of China at all, and that they can just manage China diplomatically. As a result, now they've gone silent on China, whereas they used to speak out loudly about it, and they've done nothing on defence at all. They've been weak on Ukraine and appallingly weak on Israel. I mean, you have to make a choice. If Hamas is at war with Israel, are you in favour of the liberal democracy or are you in favour of the terrorist death cult? And certainly Albanese and his ministers denounce Hamas. They do that. But they've had no cabinet discipline on this, and they've been at odds with America and Britain and with Israel itself on this. They're trying to talk out of both sides of their mouth at the same time. And I supported all the Prime Minister's individual trips, but all of that happy, clappy travel stuff, and, Miles is even worse than Albanese on it. He travels all the time but never delivers anything in defence. That's not a substitute for a real policy. Their only policy in defence is to blather on about AUKUS, for which they're not going to do anything for 10 years. And in the end, you've got to, it's where's the beef, Jack? The electorate never turns out a first-term government, but they are in, a fair amount of mid-term pain, I think.
Is there any defence to not one senior minister visiting Israel? I know Penny Wong's going to go there in January, but I don't quite understand why she's got to wait for Christmas and New Year. But that aside, is there any defence that no one's been there?
No, it's kind of pathetic, really. We make these fabulously emotional speeches about how we stand with Israel forever, and then we criticise them when they try to defend themselves, and we take no serious action of solidarity with them whatsoever. So all sorts of social democratic and centre-left leaders went to express solidarity with Israel after the most barbaric terrorist attacks we've witnessed in the modern era. Now, presumably Penny Wong, for whom I have a great deal of respect, wants to go there as late as possible in the hope that the fighting will be over by then. But, you know, you can't have it both ways. You can't stand side by side with the Islamist demonstrators in southwestern Sydney and stand side by side with Israel at the same time. You can't say, as the Prime Minister does, Hamas must be dismantled and must never again have any role in the future of Gaza, and then say to the Israelis, but you cannot take any military action to achieve that end. You cannot say we stand with Israel four square and then support a motion in the United Nations which condemns Israel, demands a ceasefire and says nothing about Hamas, and then not even send, you know, in a government which travels more often, you know, if I had their frequent flyer points, I'd resign from the paper and just spend my life on a luxury cruise. And yet they can't find it in them to have one senior minister spend one day in Israel to say, you know what, this is the only Jewish state in the world. It's a liberal democracy. It's our friend. It's our ally for many decades, and we stand with you. They won't do that because they're scared the Greens will challenge them in their inner city electorates, and they're scared Muslims might turn against them in southwestern Sydney. And you can't run a government in this reactive mode, just trying to appease one group after the other. You've got to take a choice. You know, government means making choices. And if you say yes to one thing, that means saying no to something else. And all right across the policy spectrum, you know, they're trying to say yes to everybody, and therefore they're delivering nothing.
We saw some very disturbing pictures out of southern Gaza today, where you have got these truckloads of relief that are getting through. There's not much of it getting through, but some are. But to see the crowds that then descended, and we're looking at those pictures now, descended on these vehicles, that is a horrible thing to witness. And, you know, that's not Hamas propaganda there. That's news footage from Sky UK. But that's just horrendous to witness, Greg. Look at that.
Look, it sure is, Steve. Yeah, it sure is. And being concerned about the suffering of innocent civilians in Gaza is not being anti-Israel or anti-Semitic or anything else. The moral responsibility for all of that rests on Hamas. Hamas has built 500 kilometres of tunnels under Gaza. Can you imagine how much concrete and how much money was diverted from the people of Gaza to do that? Now, I think Israel will, in the next few weeks, have to change its operations in order to allow more humanitarian supplies to get through. And, of course, some of that will be stolen by Hamas, there's no doubt. But nonetheless, it's going to have to pay that price. And that will mean probably more Israeli soldiers killed, but it will mean more Gazan civilians surviving. Israel is going to have to do that. All war is terrible and bloody. Hamas wanted this to happen. They attacked Israel in the most provocative way that they possibly could in order to produce suffering amongst their own people, in order to make the world turn against Israel. Now, you and I, Steve, can work that out. And, you know, you're a man of great intelligence. I'm a bear of little brain. You'd think the Albanese government would just about be able to work it out too.
You would. Always great to catch up.